Time for the world this week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour with us. And BAGAMERY from the International New York Times. How are you?
I'm very well.
Let's say hello to Elisabeth MOUTET of the Sunday Telegraph. Also with us, Pierre HASKI of France's leading digital newspaper, Rue 89. Do you say Rue 89 in English?
Yes.
Even in English, you say it.
You could
89th Street.
You can translate it the way you want, but Rue
Sounds
89,
better.
you say it very well.
Okay. And also with us, Aysegül SERT, almost got it right.
Aysegül SERT.
Aysegül SERT, of journalist, contributor to The New Yorker, most notably.
Among others.
Among others. Thank you for being with us here in The World This Week. The World This Week, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, our hashtag TWTW. Now, the week began with world leaders converging on the Netherlands, where a long-planned summit on nuclear security happened to coincide with Russia's takeover of Crimea after last week's phase 1 of sanctions, a get-together of what you might call the G8-1, agreeing to scrap going to Vladimir Putin's June Sochi summit. Some seem to be second-guessing the impact of that move, like Daily Telegraph cartoonist Matt saying, "Putin's here, everyone ignore him." And Elisabeth, that's from your publication there. How effective, though, do you think so far the pressure has been?
You mean the pressure on Putin? It hasn't been effective. Of course, the Telegraph being largely Eurosceptic newspaper, we're not surprised. We see the influence of the great Catherine Ashton and the immense Herman van Rompuy, and the result is absolutely nothing. And there's also a feeling that there's weakness from the American side. And it's the theory of the weak horse. And I think Putin is looking at the Europeans and saying, "You're attacking me with wet spaghetti. I'm not interested. I'll just do what I want." And he's very popular doing this in Russia. Now, what could we do is an interesting question. But the sanctions are so half-hearted and they are so weak. The one thing that actually would have been an interesting sanction is something that was suggested by Laurent Fabius, the French foreign minister. I think it was he had ignoble reasons for that. He said, why doesn't France stop selling military boats to Russia? Of course, we are talking about hundreds of jobs and tens of millions, hundreds of millions of euros here. But he said, we will stop doing this, but we would like the British to block the assets of Russian oligarchs residing in London. Now, that would be very efficient because many of Mr. Putin's best friends and some of his best frenemies live in London because it's a country with a rule of law. There aren't that many countries in the world where you can actually stash zillions of dollars while you're not sure that some leader isn't going to say, well, okay, I'm taking it. So blocking those assets, freezing those assets in London would be very efficient. It is something that, of course, the city of London doesn't want, the mayor of London doesn't want, and apparently British ministers do not want themselves because they like the influx of money to London. But that would be the only efficient sanction.
And BAGAMERY?
It's an interesting thought because of all of the potential challengers to Putin, probably one of them would have to come from the ranks of the oligarchs, from his frenemies. And, there are some that don't have all their money in London. One thinks of Khodorkovsky, who seems to have shifted his base of operations to Switzerland now that he's free. It's an interesting conjuncture because I quite agree that the sanctions haven't worked. And I also quite agree that Putin looks at the West, especially the EU and the United States, as fairly weak opposers. And it's one of those moments when you could kind of wish for the Cold War. I mean, your thing on the screen said reluctant Cold Warrior. The rhetoric that Obama was using was indeed Cold War rhetoric. We're free. We have blue jeans. We have rock and roll music or the equivalent.
That's not the Cold War.
But that was the way that the wall came down. Is we're going to tempt you with our freedom and with our capitalism and your tired old ideology simply isn't going to hold up. Well, there is that too. The thing is that there is no ideology on the other side, and the West is clearly not in the mood to start another Cold War. They're certainly not in the mood to launch any missiles, and Putin knows this. So, I mean, it's a fairly intriguing idea. I kind of like the elegance of it.
Of course,
money talks, and the other thing walks. And in this case,
There's also the question of the legality of it and whether or not it could actually be enforceable. Pierre HASKI, your thoughts on this?
I think there is an equal fight in the sense that Putin has a real strategy. He has put it in action and very swiftly, very efficiently. And on the other side, you don't have a strategy because, as you said, no one wants a new Cold War. As Elisabeth said, no one wants to compromise their interest. The British don't want to forget about the billions of dollars. The French don't want to forget about the arms sales. And that's a very unequal fight. And I think there's been a mistake in the sense that probably the most important thing to be done at the moment is to help Ukraine out of its very, very difficult position, and certainly to ensure that the May 25 presidential election, will be held in good conditions. And that should be the priority rather than shout weak protest against Putin, which have no impact.
This $18 billion, up to $18 billion IMF bailout plan that's been approved, is that good news or bad news for Ukrainians? Because there's going to be belt tightening that comes with it.
Well, obviously, I mean, I think if there's no belt tightening, then there's no money. So I think for them it's still good news in the dire situation in which they are. So it's at least giving them some oxygen until the presidential election.
All right, we have one comment here. Narcissist, thy name is Obama, to believe that he'd be able to get Putin to move 100,000 troops off Ukraine's border is borderline insanity. We're not sure it's really 100,000, but anyway. That's...
The thing with coming back to what Anne said regarding the speech that Obama gave, there were some wordings he talked about the Iron Curtain. He, of course, brought again the NATO. But at the same time, we have to be very careful, I think, about the sanctions. Because the sanctions will hurt more the EU that they will hurt, I think, the U.S. and the U.S. knows that. So there's this, the moment. That's why Russia is not really taking it very seriously in the sense of he could say the moment I cut your energy, the EU will be even in more trouble. So. There's the whole thing of, yes, I do the talk, but can I really walk the walk? Which I'm not sure we are really there.
Let's listen into what he had to say. This was Wednesday, Barack Obama's first trip to Brussels as U.S. president, a speech that in a way seemed to answer point for point the arguments laid out for a week earlier by Putin at the Kremlin.
Russia's leadership is challenging truths that only a few weeks ago seemed self-evident. That in the 21st century, the borders of Europe cannot be redrawn with force. That international law matters. That people and nations can make their own decisions about their future.
In that same speech, BAGAMERY, he said freedom's not free. And actually, no, he said that earlier in the day. But he did call in the speech on his NATO partners to step up and do their bit.
Okay. And what exactly does that mean? It's, it's very frustrating sometimes to be an American and be a supporter of the president and see him do his professorial thing. When what we want him to do is to just haul off and smack somebody. It's a big political debate in the U.S., even on the right. Conservative commentators are saying that Obama shouldn't behave like Putin, but then when he doesn't behave like Putin, they say, why not? It's a tough position to be in a way when you really cannot back up what you're saying with force. And I guess maybe now we're looking back again at those Cold War days and realizing that it wasn't blue jeans and rock and roll. It really was the willingness of everybody to drop a bomb on somebody else.
All right. Some people with a tinge of irony, I see. Laura saying, Obama calls on Putin to move troops from Ukraine border. Oh, that should do it. Now, just final point on this issue of sanctions, whether or not they're working. They are drawing a reaction. Russia this Friday launching what it calls retaliatory sanctions against the West. We don't quite know what they are yet. But they've already announced measures to counter those out of Washington and Europe. After Visa and MasterCard suspended transactions with Bank Rossiya, Russia's fourth largest bank, reportedly close to the Kremlin, Putin insisted it's your loss.
It's a pity that some companies made a decision about some well-known restrictions. I think this will simply lead to the loss of certain market segments for them, a market which is very profitable. Well, it's not our decision. We have to protect our interests, and we'll do it.
And Elisabeth?
The KGB is teaching us, next KGB colonel is teaching us about market economy. But there's a great deal of irony in this, all right. He may be right, but it still pinches.
It does pinch then.
It does pinch. It does pinch. And again, I make the case that Russia is a country where your wealth can be taken away from you by the government. Your social position, your freedom can be taken away from you by the government. There are things that Putin is the government, so this is fine. But there are things about those people who deal with the economy in Russia. They would like to have normal relations with the rest of the world where there is rule of law and they are protected from that. So I think that is the real argument, is that the whole thing is there at the pleasure of the dictator who's lording it over you.
Can I float an idea, though, about the seizure of the assets? Because you're right, there are some legal issues involved. What about something along the lines of the Iran-U.S. Claims Tribunal? After the seizure of the embassy, there was a separate tribunal set up to adjudicate the seizure of Iranian assets outside the United States, or outside of Iran, rather. Something like that could possibly be proposed and put into place.
It can be done. Also, it would be massively interesting to investigate exactly where these assets come from. Absolutely. And frankly, it is possible, because I also remember the investigations with the help of agencies like Kroll at the time of the first Gulf War into Saddam's assets. Mm-hmm. It is perfectly possible to find out, and it would be fun.
Aysegül, sir?
But I don't mean to be an advocate of Putin, because I wouldn't be able to sleep tonight. But in the sense of EU has to be very careful about those sanctions, because let's take and now I'm going to be a Turk speaking about Greece, but if we take the example of Greece, the little amount of income that they have actually coming in right now, it's from those Russian businessmen who are trying to invest in it. It's actually from the tourism that the Russians are bringing. So if within those sanctions we do include whether it's visa restrictions or anything, it will hurt not only Greece, which is already quite hurt and bruised, but also the European Union, and it will be like shooting your own leg while trying to actually harm the other side. So
yes, but that's what you do in war. So when you go at war, even with economic means, you know that you can be hurt. I mean, it hurts.
Yes, but when you talk about war, that means you don't start the first step of a war if you're not ready to go the whole way. Right. And no one is ready today to go the whole way. And the first one is Obama. Obama himself. You know, the irony of this crisis is that for the past 5 years, Obama has been turning his back on Europe, saying, the next border is Asia, we're the pivot, I don't know how you say it, pivot. And all of a sudden, the real hard crisis that he has to face now is in Europe, where he has no interest, where he's been pulling out, where he's definitely got no energy. You know, when you look at things, you wonder who's going to fight this war. So why you start a confrontation on a ground where you're not ready to fight?
Well, you don't have
the
an
Europeans
ally.
have brought down their defense budgets in an incredible way, and I can tell you, France is maybe ready to fight in Mali, but it's not ready to fight the Russians, and nobody else is. So I think for the moment nothing very serious has been made, and I think my suggestion would be to try to avoid an escalation, because no one has to gain.
But I agree with you on this, and it's very true. But the whole wisdom was supposed to be that Obama was really interested in the Pacific. Well, there hasn't been a war between China and Japan yet, but he didn't do much to prevent
hang on a
that
second,
kind of
Elisabeth.
hostility.
This week at that same meeting in the Netherlands, Barack Obama got the Prime Minister of Japan and the President of South Korea into the same room, and they've had big differences. And we had one Asia analyst this week tell us nobody else but the U.S. could have accomplished that.
The South Koreans and the Japanese have got mostly big differences about the past. The
But it shows
Chinese
that the
and the
US
Japanese
still
have
has
differences
clout.
about the past, the present, and the future.
It's true that the U.S. has power. Let's be honest in the sense that if the U.S. doesn't go in, the others don't follow. We saw the example with Syria. So it still has that power, that leadership. That I completely agree. But I agree with Pierre in the sense that big EU has to be very careful who is backing it, basically.
Yeah.
We're going to move on. Last week around this same time, we were discussing Turkey's Twitter ban that's since been lifted by the courts after, well, a pretty ineffectual run. It even saw the president himself turn to the social networking site to complain. That was last week. Thursday, we learned of a ban on YouTube. This over a purported inter-cabinet strategy session on Syria and ahead of Sunday's local elections, the prime minister sharing his feelings at a campaign rally.
How low can you get? It is immoral, disgraceful, shameful. How can we accept this and stay silent? I've said this before, but we will respond very severely.
Prime Minister Erdogan. A lot of people, I've been reading the Turkish press this morning, at least the press in English, the opposition columnists this time say this is a step too far, bugging a national security meeting.
Well, first of all, you said who was that? That was Prime Minister Erdogan, who actually had a very high-pitched voice. He lost his voice. And there was a hashtag helium prime minister kind of thing, as if he inhaled helium. And that's the thing that comes back to it in terms of, as a leader, there comes a point when you have to think, if you're Obama, what's going to be your legacy? And if you are someone like Erdogan, well, you don't think about legacy because you think you're going to be there forever. Mm-hmm. So you think about your image. And he's trying to show an image that's strong, that's leading, and actually he's being ridiculed as a helium.
Crack, I mean. No other way of saying
no
it.
comment. But as a helium, it's so what's happening is, the Twitter ban happened, YouTube ban happened yesterday after recordings that were put out, and it almost sounds like a joke, because the recording that was put on YouTube was of a secret meeting between the foreign minister.
The head of intelligence?
The head of intelligence, the head of military, and actually talking about a potential plot to go into Syria.
All right, I'm going to interrupt you there because a lot of questions about this, but we're going to have to take a very quick break. Stay with us. You're watching The World This Week.